Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Merry Christmas. Again, this is the second part to the news update for the Ukraine war for Christmas Day 2023. I haven't got too much to share with you, but I kind of need to purge this all from my system before moving on, I guess, tomorrow and whatnot. And I know this is kind of, resumption of normal service, as if there's not been any pause in normal service, and I guess that's just if nothing else, I'm consistent, right? So we will just plow through as I normally do. Now, first thing I'm going to say is in reference to the claims that I was talking about in my earlier video today, the three Su jets, I forget which ones that were shot down, Su somethings, 24s, 30s, 35s, whatever. I think they were Su-35s actually that were shot down by the Patriot air defense system or something similar. Not quite sure what shot them down the other day. And then there were all these claims that there were F-16s that have been shot down. 6 F-16s have been shot down. There's been a NASAMS destroyed, a Krotel destroyed, and a Patriot air defense system, as according to the Russian MOD, Russian sources, so on and so forth. They are really angry, I think, about having lost these jets, and so they are just making all sorts of BS claims concerning Ukrainian losses. And indeed, here's another example. So non-fictional Z Patriot stories with exclusive 2018 photos. So Telegram channels of Z Patriot started massively publishing photos of an allegedly destroyed F-16 fighter jet at an airfield in Odessa. But as usual, the Kremlin propagandist's fake was uncovered quite quickly. In fact, this photo was taken at a Belgian Air Force base in 2018. And there you go. There's a photo they are showing of supposedly this F-16 that's been destroyed at Odessa, and it is indeed from 2018 and from a Belgian airfield. So just be warned, this isn't to do with aid or geopolitical stuff yet. This is concerning that last video, but just be warned, there will be a lot of propaganda going on, a lot of disinformation from Russian sources concerning F-16s. It's highly unlikely that any claims concerning F-16s from the Russians are true, because they don't appear to be in the country yet. But we heard this with Bradleys. Bradleys were blown up before they got there. HIMARS were blown up before they got there. We've seen this before. They have form, the Russians. Anyway, moving on to aid, and again, not a great amount to talk about here. So the state budget of Ukraine received $1.34 billion as the 6th additional financing within the framework of the World Bank project supporting public expenditures to ensure public administration in Ukraine, or peace in Ukraine, has been added to. So that's all has not been added to, but they've received that 6th tranche there. Fantastic. That'll allow them to keep functioning as a country. Right, the first batch of F-16 fighters, speaking of which, for Ukraine will be modified, according to Yuri Ignat, the spokesman for the Air Force of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, said on air on a telethon. We are talking about a modification that will allow you to see the enemy at an even greater distance. Enterprises in Europe and the USA are engaged in the improvement of the aircraft. So, they've already shot these aircraft down and they're still actually being upgraded. That is going to be massively significant. If they can get, the whole thing about doing up tanks. So when you see these main battle tanks being given to Ukraine, and even if they are older Leopard 1s or upgraded T-72s, the thing about tanks is, A, you're ready in a tank-on-tank battle, but even if you are, B, you need to see the enemy before they see you. So if you're going to do anything to tanks, it's about having optics and, thermal imagery and fire control systems. So being able to see the enemy before they can see you, so you have a greater range, you acquire the target, and you have a better ability to destroy the target with your fire control system, your FCS. That's what you want in your tank. So it's all right if you're getting older Leopard 1s. It's all right if you're getting older T-72s. They're not the greatest tank, but if you're upgrading them to have better fire control systems than the opposition, then actually that is really quite useful. And the same goes for your airframes. You are generally not going to have, you aren't really going to have dogfights in the air. You are going to have a pop at an enemy that is beyond the horizon. And if you can see them before they can see you, you can shoot your missiles off, you win that engagement. hugely important. So if they are getting these longer range radars, that is huge news. Right, Latvia has already sent 271 cars to Ukraine that were confiscated for drunk driving. So this was something that was announced some time ago, and apparently they've sent almost 300 cars taken off drunk drivers to Ukraine. Brilliant. Total value of the confiscated cars is estimated at almost 1 million euros, according to Delphi. That's fantastic. Now we have actually 3 different types of drones being talked about here. So Ukraine is broadly boosting drone production to fill military requirements with a focus on efficiency and diversification of drone models, as per the Defense Minister Rustem Umerov. So here we're looking at a Shark drone. And in terms of aerial drones, at least 40 different variants of drones are being manufactured and used. So that is huge. But it may be even more than that. I can't quite remember the figure. I keep wanting to say 80, but it is probably 40. But nonetheless, you get the idea. There's a massive diversity of drones, which is great because you have drones for different usages, for different intentions and operations. So fantastic. Now, here we see a UGV, an unmanned ground vehicle, being tested. So engineers from Kharkiv are testing the ground drone Circo S1 in winter conditions with a maximum load of 200 kilograms. That's pretty heavy. So when you're talking about some of these drones that they're developing at the moment, they're maybe 10 kilogram payload, 15 kilogram payload. Obviously, you can go higher, but the higher you go, the more fuel you're going to need, and the more you're going to have to mess around with the design because that will affect the flight. Whereas something like a UGV, actually weight doesn't have that much effect, or at least the effect on a UGV is going to be less prevalent than the effect on a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle. So these sort of things can take pretty heavy weights, and that means that they're going to be good for giving ammunition and supplies to frontline troops. We talked about that before. It's that last mile that is really problematic. It's quite often the complaints of Ukrainian troops or even Russian troops not having supplies isn't so much that they don't have that ammunition in Ukraine or at all. It's not that they don't have small arms ammunition. It's like, who gets to carry it how do you get it that last mile from sort of behind the front line to the contact line, that zero line? How do you get it there when this is really heavy stuff? So you have to take a crate of ammo that last mile. And that's being sighted by drones. You're going to be absolutely hammered. You're trying to walk it to a trench. There are no vehicles. It's muddy. Blah blah blah. This is when something like this UGV comes in handy, and we've seen the Russians use these to deliver supplies, and we have seen evidence of even injured people being carried away or dragged away in one case by a UGV. So I think there's going to be a place for UGVs, a growing place for them going forward in this conflict, and indeed any conflict. So SBU, so here we have a maritime drone, or USV, unmanned surface vehicle or unmanned sea vehicle. SBU for the first time showed the naval drone Kozak Mame. This drone, and this is insane, is now the fastest object in the Black Sea and can accelerate to 110 kilometers per hour. It was created for maneuvering under heavy enemy fire, which the trigger mechanism touched the trigger mechanism and boom. In other words, I guess what we've seen with some of the Sea Babies, some of these other maritime drones, where we've seen some of that footage from, is that they attempt to drive up to the ships, and then I guess it's the impact triggers. But sometimes you want to blow that drone up maybe a little bit before, and we may only be talking meters or whatever it is, but you need more control over that drone blowing up. And when these other drones are maybe going, 30 knots or whatever it is that they are shooting along at, they're actually slow enough to be fairly easily hit by your heavy machine guns or whatever munitions the ships and helicopters are firing at them. Actually, if you're moving at 110 kilometers an hour and you're weaving it around, this then becomes a much more difficult target to hit, particularly at night. And then if you can trigger it to explode at any given point, then it just gives you more options there. This is exactly what Zaluzhny was talking about in his Economist article and his and the chapter or paper that he wrote, if you like. The Ukrainians need to have the advantage in terms of technological innovation, and they need to be ahead of the curve there. They need to be ahead of the Russians in what they are designing and producing, and then they need to scale it. So finally, for this section, Minister expects a bill in coming days to change approaches to mobilisation. So this is going to be very significant. This is the biggest challenge I think the Ukrainians have, full stop. A bill on the mobilisation of conscripts will be registered in Verkhovna Rada, Ukraine's parliament, in the coming days. Defence Minister Rustem Umerov told Ukrainian media outlet Suspilna on December the 24th. In an interview, Umerov said the bill would change the approaches to mobilisation in Ukraine to make sure that society does not see conscription as a punishment. So there are several ways you need to look at this. It's not just the trouble of getting members of the public mobilized and to the front line or into the armed forces, right? So it's not like you're not just looking at, we have a lack of people that want to be mobilized and people are going to be unhappy, then they're going to run away. And we have that issue there. But it's also, if we take these people from public life, then who is doing that job? What are we doing about that loss of income, that hit to the labour market that we've seen in Russia? So Russia has a labour shortage. They have real issues. They had people escaping the country, as the Ukrainians did as well, and they don't have people in particular job sectors because they've been sent to the front line. So the Ukrainians are going to have to deal with this very delicately. Then they know it's delicate, hence you hear the talk about we don't want it to be seen as a punishment. And it might not just be about saying, right, we're mobilizing so that we're going to send all of you to the front line. We're going to mobilize you. Some of you are going to be drone operators, and we're going to look at your expertise. This is what James from Why Ukraine, who's been on a couple of my live streams recently, was talking about. He's saying, and I think the rules are changing with that in that regard. Is that look at people's expertise, see what skills they have, and actually see where they're best placed inside the defence forces. Not just like, right, we're drafting you into the front line, and there you go. Okay, but keep an eye out for that. This is going to be significant news, I believe, in that area. Okay, just a few geopolitical bits. So as you can imagine, Christmas Day, there's not a lot of news coming out at all. So I'm going to mainly concentrate on one topic that is tangentially related to Ukraine. Right. Anyway, Randy Mott here says, who's a Republican, who's pretty annoyed about the situation with aid and whatnot. Says no one realistically thought the deal would be done on Ukraine funding, so this is the US aid, and the border before the Christmas break. It will get done in the Senate in early January, so he's fairly bullish about that. The GOP in the House will agree with a proviso that they get the symbolic IG for Ukraine aid, and the White House announces its objective: win the war and restore the borders. This has been creeping into Democratic comments. Interesting observation there. But there is a well-organized effort led by Russia to sell a stalemate as the only possible outcome and give Russia a tie. So my point of talking about this is that expect Russia to be selling that this is a stalemate. Hence, we're starting to see talk about ceasefire, and they'll be trying to drive a wedge into the cracks in US support by saying, look, you can't agree on aid, you're not providing aid, therefore it's a stalemate, therefore let's go to the negotiating table and we'll have ourselves Crimea and Donbass. Thank you very much. So look out for that kind of narrative going on. Okay, UK Defence Minister, that's Grant Shapps, has warned of severe consequences if Putin does win the war in Ukraine. UK Defence Minister Shapps told the Sunday Times on the 24th in an interview that the West cannot afford to lose a war in Ukraine and that there will be severe consequences if dictator Putin wins. Quote, if we allow Putin to win this war by dragging it out and he somehow wins by exhausting everyone else, then we will suffer the consequences, and the consequences will be incredibly severe for Europe, for Britain and for the world. Absolutely right. And as I've said about people like Emmanuel Macron and these others who are keeping the rhetoric strong on Ukraine and in the limelight, this is really important. Grant Shapps needs to shout about this. There isn't enough. Like I was at Christmas lunch today, I didn't want to talk about Ukraine, but it came up just once from my mother actually saying, we don't hear anything about Ukraine on the news anymore. Your uncle wants to speak to you about that because you don't really know what's going on. And that's the issue, is it's now off the radar. Israel-Palestine has come along. People have got bored. News cycles are about clicks and interest, and people have moved on. But that's dangerous because if people move on from Ukraine, Putin will be rewarded. Putin gains in those situations. So we have to, that's why, I'm keeping on talking about this. I'm obsessed, but I'm obsessed not just because of all the things that obsess me about this war, but also it's my realization this is freaking that important. This is existential. We can't afford not to talk about it, and that's why I continue to do so. Russian central bank head says the country should prepare for increased sanction pressure. So this is Russians saying, it is, of course, tempting to think that we fared well in 2022 and now we don't have a care in the world, said Elvira Nabiolina today. But we need to prepare for increased pressure from sanctions. There's an important admission there. And actually, if you look at Joe Bloggs' latest video from yesterday about how they are just making continual deficits and eating into their reserves, the Russians are arguably in big trouble. It might not be absolutely apparent now, but all the signs are, and I know we've been saying this for a long time, but actually, when you've got deep pockets and you've got a lot of hydrocarbons and you're still selling them around the world, but if you're not making the money you planned on making and you're cutting the production of that stuff, and if you can eat into your reserves and it all looks like it's fine and you're propping up the ruble, but eventually that house of cards will come tumbling down, and that's kind of the point. Right, so the last thing I'm going to say, just a little wee chat about this, because I'm being challenged quite a bit by particularly a guy called W Bin here, Wheelie Bin, Waste Bin, who wants me to look at a load of TVP documentaries on Donald Tusk and says, look, this guy's like totally pro-Ukraine and a good supporter of the channel, so thank you very much, W Bin, but also is trying to call me out saying, look, I've been posting you these documentaries, you need to watch this stuff from TVP on Donald Tusk. Donald Tusk, the new ruler, the new leader in Poland, is terrible, X, Y, and Z. And I said, look, I don't have time. I'm operating at 100% at the moment. Like, I have no spare time. I am maxed. I do this. I write, edit, and publish on the side. I'm also a journalist on the side. Like, there are other things that I do as well, and I do this full time. And I do this full time to the point where I do this 7 days a week, 365 days a week. Haven't had a day off for 600 days, and I spend so many hours on this a day. Like, to then go, right, I'm going to sit down and watch 10 hours of documentaries on Polish state television and how they treat Donald Tusk. Like, I could sort of justify that, but I just don't have time at the moment. But what I do know about TVP is that they are massively propagandistic and anti-Tusk, and have been anti-Tusk for a long time. And so therefore, if you are telling me, look at A, B, C, and D about Donald Tusk, Donald Tusk has just shut down TVP because of their campaign against Donald Tusk and opposition politics in Poland. So if you're going to come and say, you need to know this about Tusk, and all of that information is coming from the very people who have had a campaign of propaganda against Donald Tusk for 8 years, then I'm going to say, is it worth me watching what is outright propaganda? I mean, it's just outright propaganda. Find me some independent sources, possibly, and I'll look into that. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at outright propaganda against Donald Tusk. So let's just do a little bit of context about this. So what happened is Donald Tusk and the minority coalition government got in because Justice and Law Party, the ruling government, who was massively right-wing authoritarian government who had been democratically backsliding, and had changed the judiciary, and they had taken over the state broadcaster and used it as a propaganda arm. And this is who he's telling me to watch on Donald Tusk. This is what they've done. So Donald Tusk got in and said, and he'd said previously. So what he said previously, well, actually, if you go back and look at this article from November, this is before Tusk was made leader. This is from The Guardian. Art, Law, History and TV. Tusk's plan to remake Polish life after right-wing rule. And here it said, public television is perhaps the most visible of all the pro-PIS, that's the Justice and Law Party, institutions the new coalition has promised to reform. Under PIS, the state broadcaster TVP was showered with funds and its news channel brought firmly under control, spouting full-blown propaganda reminiscent of television in Vladimir Putin's Russia. Tusk, on the campaign trail, said he would need just 24 hours to completely reset public television, though he declined to say how. So, and then it gives ideas how he's going to do it. And Martin Wolski, a writer and satirist who had a show on the public television and spent 2 years in charge of one of its channels in 2016-17, and this is after PIS, so 2015, PIS took over TVP and just changed it into propaganda arm. He said he made waves by saying he was ashamed of the propaganda being broadcast by state television and thought it was worse than in communist times. So this is where TVP are. This is where they've been. So Politico wrote Poland's revolution gets real as government reclaims control of public media. Right, they wrote just recently, TVP, public television, Polish radio, and the Polish news press agency, PAP, became subject to tight political control shortly after PIS won power in 2015, which saw Poland slide in global media freedom rankings. The coverage, so objectively, the TVP was seen as bad, as authoritarian propaganda. The coverage was heavily skewed towards the government, something election observers said heavily favoured the PIS as well as President Andrzej Duda. So basically PIS then subsequently got in because they had the entire media network behind them and helped shift the outcome of the 2019 parliamentary and 2020 presidential elections. So there you go. State media were firmly behind PIS in this year's parliamentary election campaign as well. The PIS government spent over 2 billion zloty, so 465 million euros on TVP this year, and over 7 billion from 2017 to 2022. This is phenomenal money they pumped into TVP. So Polish public media are financed by mandatory licensing fees, so very similar to the BBC in the UK, paid by the public, and by statute, except we have, in the UK, we've got the BBC Charter, so it has to be independent. And it gets slagged off by the left, slagged off by the right, and the reality is it probably does sit somewhere in the middle, and in fact, it very rarely gives political opinion. The opinions come out. So what it does do is it skews culturally liberal, but people then think that it skews politically liberal, but it doesn't. If you look at who the political editors have been at the BBC for the last 10 years, whether it be Nick Robinson, Laura Kunsberg, the Today programme, what's his name on Radio 4, Nick Robinson was the head of the Tory student club at Oxford University or whatever it was. So, these are all of those people in the top political positions in the BBC have actually been conservatives, right? But people who skew right don't like to look at that, and they look at the liberal bias, if you like, in the moral social idea as it's trying to reflect society and talking about, well, there's homosexuality in society, and so we're going to have inclusivity, and they think therefore it's politically liberal. But actually, when you look at the actual fundamental political programs, they are not politically liberal. When you look at Andrew Neil's flagship program on the BBC, although that's no longer running, but these are not politically liberal programs. Actually, they're broadly fairly objective or skewed to the right in many ways. You look at the treatment of Jeremy Corbyn when he was trying to get into number 10, and actually all the objective analyses of the way that he was represented by the media, he was the single most negatively represented person in UK politics for like however long. So, and I'm not being pro Corbyn or anything like that, not at all. But actually, the idea that the BBC is politically left is a bit of a myth. And I know people in the threads will go, rah, but actually, just go and look at some analyses. I've researched this before. Just honestly, go and look at some analyses here. It sits in the middle because the left slag it off of skewing right, and the right slag it off of skewing left. And you need to know what's being talked about when you talk about left-right. Are you talking about cultural stuff, or you're talking about political stuff? And I know there's an overlap. But anyway, the Polish media are financed by mandatory licensing fees paid by the public, and by statute they are supposed to be free of bias. But they're not in Poland. Under earlier governments, they tilted toward whoever was in power, which is a little bit like the BBC, but did try to be broadly fair. However, when PIS won the 2015 election, it moved swiftly to oust management, editors and reporters seen as unfavourable to the new government. The PIS argument was that public media were needed as a counterweight to private television and newspapers that generally favoured their opponents. Losing control of powerful media outlets just after losing power is a double blow for the party. In other words, the PIS really need this to kind of get power back again. It's such a powerful arm. Propaganda is so important. Just another point on bias in media. Also, don't think about comedy programs as being representative of the political positioning of a channel necessarily. There's a really interesting, I've written articles on this as well, about how comedy will skew to the left because in the nature of punching up as opposed to punching down in comedy being more favourable. So you left wing versus right wing comedy is an interesting discussion to be had in there. I'm not going to go down that route, but anyway, you can look at some of my articles on that on Only Sky. I've written articles on that. Anyway, when we look at TVP, look at the Wikipedia page. Even the title, takeover by the PAS political party in 2015 is interesting. So in 2015, it really did become part of the political arm of the PIS, and all these controversies. I mean, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I would say in 2015, the government passed a law allowing it to directly appoint the head of TVP, and since then, TVP has displayed bias towards the Law and Justice Party and was compared by critics with propaganda of the former communist regime. TVP has also faced criticism for portrayal of LGBT people, political opposition, Jews, and other groups as a shadowy conspiracy seeking to undermine Poland. In 2018, The Economist stated, and The Economist isn't exactly left-wing, the TVP anchors praise PIS slavishly while branding its critics treacherous crypto-communists, which is what it has done for years with Donald Tusk. So if you're going to signpost criticisms of Donald Tusk to me, and they are explicitly from TVP, then I'm basically probably not going to take time to watch them. Politico's accused it of having strong pro PIS bias, and it's so on and so forth. There's loads in here, lots of really dodgy stuff. Mouthpiece. So TVP was heavily criticised in the run-up to the 2020 Polish presidential election, being described as a mouthpiece of the government and as peddling government hate speech by Reporters Without Borders. State television broadcast a segment of Vladomochki called something with lots of letters that I can't read regarding the civic platform candidate Rafał Trzaskowski. A complaint was made by American Jewish Committee, Union of Jewish Religious Communities, Chief Rabbi of Poland, etc., regarding anti-Semitism. The council concluded not only were anti-Semitic statements made in the show, it did not uphold journalistic standards, so on and so forth. It turned into an instrument of propaganda of one of the candidates in the election, which is exactly what it has done just now. So it was totally just anti-Tusk, to the point that in 2022 Donald Tusk tried to took it to court. Anyway, Timothy Garton-Ash, who's an interesting historian, the broadcaster has descended into a paranoid world of the far right where spotless, heroic, perpetually misunderstood Poles are being conspired against by dark, international German Jewish LGBT plutocratic forces meeting secretly in Swiss chateau. TVP president rejected the contention that the organisation violated broadcasting law, and conservative media commentator and former TVP employee says the station deserves recognition as a consistent promotion of patriotism and pro-state thinking. So that's their side of the story, but the idea that it's what Timothy Garton-Ash says, it seems to be far more justified. So just finally on this, and I'll relate this back to Ukraine in a second. So just looking at sort of Reddit threads from a couple of years ago, just really going to town on how propagandistic TVP is and about how it relates to Donald Tusk. Every night now for months, TVP finds a story to give them an excuse to show pictures of Donald Tusk and Putin together. This is absolutely clear and a deliberate propaganda policy of TVP PIS. The results of his propaganda campaign, just like this, can be seen very clearly now in the Russian people with their obviously blind support of Putin regardless of the consequences. The Russian people now see the terrible death and destruction taking place in Ukraine, but still believe it was done by Ukrainians. It's complete madness to imagine this is possible. The only explanation is a sustained propaganda policy over many years by Putin and the Russian government. Now we see the results. What is happening in Poland now, this is back in 2021, by the PIS, is an attempt to copy this same policy to convince the population of Poland that PIS are the only choice, and to in every possible way discredit Tusk and his party. Absolutely disgusting behaviour by a European government. Public media taken over by PIS have been manipulating the public since the beginning. Party propaganda 24 hours a day. What the party editors and their managers do is a criminal offence. I hope that one day they will be brought to justice, which is why Tusk has gone in and wiped out the management, because this is what the situation was. As someone says here, it's equivalent to RT, to Russia Today. They even have an English-only version now. They obsessively discredit Tusk and continue to denounce and argue EU regulation. even though Poland would still be a roadless, unprogressive nation from 1980 if it wasn't for EU membership and funding. Polish government behaves like a spoiled, arrogant and naive teenager. It needs to grow up and join the EU proper if it ever wants an economy to catch up to its EU neighbours. And even if you effing hate PIS, you pay for it with your taxes. The effing clown that would be president if it wouldn't be president if it weren't for him using public television exclusively for the propaganda during the elections. Now this is legal, or how this is legal, or maybe it isn't. It's PIS after all. And so my family calls TVP Polish parody of North Korean television, so on and so forth. So you get the idea here. Now, why? Tusk did take it to court in 2022 because it incited, basically, it seemed to cite seemed to see him as a target for physical attacks, so he claimed. But this I thought was interesting before I finish off. Sorry, I know this has been a long bit. Last year, an analysis for a media news website found that since Tusk's return as leader of Poland's main opposition party, so this is before he got in, this is 2022, state television broadcast negative coverage of him virtually every day. So again, if you're going to tell me that I should go and watch TVP, this is what they do. Between 3rd of July and 3rd of August 2021, 78 reports on the Wiadomości news show, that's the one we just heard about from Wikipedia, featured Tusk. And 75, that's 96% of those presented him negatively. 4 segments showed Tusk neutrally, and none presented him in a positive light. While public broadcasters in Poland have always been under the influence of whichever parties are in power, a number of media watchdogs and commentators have noted the current politicization of state TV is unprecedented in a post-communist era and a violation of the public media's statutory obligation to be neutral. And again, it refers to Reporters Without Borders saying it's government propaganda mouthpiece. Under PIS's rule, Poland has fallen from its highest ever position of 18th in Reporting Without Borders annual World Press Freedom Index to the lowest ever position, 64th. It has plummeted down the freedom of press. Now, why is this important to Ukraine? Well, actually, when you look at what's going on in Serbia at the moment, and Vucic has just got in, by having his control over the media mechanisms in Serbia and the incitement of those, ultra-nationalists there and all sorts of whatever other political things he does, there's a lot to be said about the control of the media. After fraudulent elections in Serbia, it's clear that there's no level of violence the Russian fascist state will not engage to keep its puppet Vucic in power. Democratic nations should mount an observation mission for a repeat election as in Ukraine in 2004, but probably won't. So there's a lot of calls to rerun the election. But when you are in the same way that the TVP were accused of having a hand in those 2019-2020 elections, and indeed the most recent election just now, it's the same as it ever was, around the world, is that if you have authoritarian rule, one of the first things you do is control information. And you control information by controlling media. And this is what Fidesz has done. It's what Viktor Orban has done in Hungary. And it's why they have slipped back in corruption indexes and in freedom of press indexes, and which is why the EU are pretty pissed off with them, because they are democratically backsliding. It's all joined together, and Poland did the same. Poland did the same with the judiciary, and like that, the Guardian article here talks about the judiciary as well. They need to revamp that because PIS has wrecked that. Now, if you're a big fan of authoritarian rule, then you're going to be a big fan of controlling the media, controlling the judiciary. But it's not cool. So when you're looking at Ukraine going forward, you're thinking they're going to have to jump through hoops. They're going to need to be moving up the list in terms of the Transparency International Corruption Index, and moving up the list in terms of freedom of press. That's a big thing for the EU, and it's what Hungary did do, but the problem is they then backslid after that, and there are no mechanisms really in place. It's Article 7, I think it is, but it's very difficult to kick people out of the EU. You can take away their voting rights in extreme cases, which is being considered for Hungary. But this is a worry. So when nations have these institutions in their pockets, you have to worry. Russia is a prime example of this. So when it comes to Donald Tusk and Poland, the fact that he has cleared out the top brass of TVP and these media institutions is exactly right, and it's exactly what I would do, and exactly what I would expect to happen if you want those institutions to be free and fair, balanced, neutral, objective. Now, the question is he going to place his own puppets in charge? And that is a a worry that one might have and be justified in having. But you need to clear out those people because they are propaganda arms for the PIS. It is absolutely, I have no problem with what Donald Tusk did. The only issue is where he goes next. And in fact, I think that might have been talked about here in this paragraph. So Volsky said he was skeptical about Tusk's government would be able to resist the temptation to simply reframe public television as a tool for the new government. And he actually talks about this, and this goes back to what I was saying. The BBC, quote, the BBC standard is something to look up to, but I don't think it's very likely in practice. So having a charter is really strict, the BBC. You probably don't. People in Britain love to slag off the BBC, but it is kept on a really tight leash in what it can and can't say. And as a charter, and although governments will try and play with who's placed on the board and stuff, it is very difficult for the BBC to be overtly partisan. It's in the nature of politicians that they want the media to act as their mouthpiece, he said. So again, that is a challenge going forward, and it's the same. I think this is just I guess a bit of a lesson for all nations is that, you know, as soon as a political party has the media in its pocket, you're in trouble. Things is not cool. And so we need to make sure that we genuinely have a freedom of press. It is one of those things that we must fight for. It's so important. And so I have no problem with Tusk doing that. And if you are gonna present to me that Tusk is a terrible human being for X, Y, and Z reasons, if all those X, Y, and Z reasons are from TVP, then I am going to take the time to say I ain't gonna watch that. Although, fair enough, present me with easily digestible bullet points and sources where I can go to probably outside of TVP to see if I'm justified in thinking Tusk is XYZ, right? So it's not to dismiss what W. Bin is saying here, and thank you for taking your time to do that and do this research. I'm not going to be a fan of going to the Lion's Den to check out whether lions really do like eating, you know, vloggers from the UK. So, you know, that's a bad analogy, but you get my point. Anyway, what's that thing? Oh, what am I supposed to say? Oh yeah, that's it. Merry Christmas. Take care, everyone. Speak soon. Doodle pips.